Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. On the corner of King George Street and Jaffa Street in Jerusalem is a bakery. And if you approach that bakery on Shabbat and you're standing in line to get in, one, especially one with a short memory, might see a very small placard, not much bigger than this sign here that I hold in my hand, that lists in Hebrew the atrocity that happened in that very space on that very summer day. Because before that store was a bakery, it was a pizza shop by the name of Sparrow. And a Palestinian terrorist had walked into it with a guitar case, and inside the guitar case, loaded with explosives, and he took his life along with far too many others who came to have a slice of pizza and a Coca-Cola on a hot summer day. Within days, that scene, which was a crime scene, a murder scene, and a horrific scene to see, put your side on. Within days, literal days, like 2 or 3, that scene had been cleaned up, transformed, and that location was serving pizza again. There's something very powerful in Israel about moments when these terrible attacks happen, especially in establishments, and then the collective comes back and they clean up quickly and they open up for business in this defiant way of saying, we will not be shut down by terrorists. There's only one place in all of Israel where that is not the case. There's one place where terrorism occurred that has since never gone back to what it was and has always served as a shrine to that moment, to that place, to that which happened there, as a painful reminder of not only that piece of terrorism, but of the aftermath of that terrorism. That didn't happen in Jerusalem, what I'm referring to, but rather in Tel Aviv, in the heart of the city, at a place that used to be called Kikar Mlachim, King Square, and was later called Kikar Rabin, Rabin Square. Because Yitzhak Rabin, after attending a rally, came down a flight of stairs and was murdered by a homegrown terrorist, an Israeli. If you go to that site today, you will not only see a memorial to Yitzhak Rabin, you'll see places on the ground that show you where Rabin, his bodyguards, and the murderer stood, and you'll see a wall, a large wall, that has been preserved, where Israelis had come in their pain and their sorrow, and they had put graffiti on the wall to express their anguish and their shock in this moment. And this place is preserved because the government and the people of Israel don't want us to forget what happened in that place. I share these two stories with you because I am weighing and considering what is the proper way of recognizing, memorializing, and paying tribute to a terrorist attack. After the news and the sights that I witnessed, and that you witnessed as well, on Wednesday in our nation's capital, of thugs, of criminals, of terrorists, some of them wearing the most horrendous T-shirts and thoughts and epithets on their chest, like Camp Auschwitz or 6 million wasn't enough, and those were just a few. There were plenty others. And Nazi symbols were found in emblems every which way you turned. And they came and they defiled the citadel of our government, the Capitol. They tried to breach the House of Representative floor, and they did breach the Senate floor. They defiled the dais where the President of the Senate sits, the Vice President of the United States. They looted and they pillaged. And I was revolted, as I'm sure most of you were. And then, within hours after being cleaned and reorganized, our nation's leaders went back to work, as if to say to those criminals and thugs, your attempt to overthrow us and to stop our sacred duty to our democracy will not be stopped. I thought in those moments about that Sbarro pizzeria, and I thought in those moments about the shrine to Yitzhak Rabin. Both were pure acts of terrorism. Both were meant to be a wake-up call to the government to stop what they were doing. Both took Jewish and Israeli lives. And one got back to work, and one stayed there as a permanent reminder. And on one side, I was so proud of our elected officials for not being deterred and for getting back to work in that very space that was defiled just hours before. But there was another part of me that felt that that defilement should stay, that the way in which those offices and that sacred space of our government was attacked needed to be a place to at least pause and to absorb and to remind us of the desecration that had taken place. When I saw what happened on Wednesday, one question kept running through my mind. The question that kept running through my mind is, are we watching the very beginning of something, or are we watching the very end of something? Is this something that's happening that is the end of a particular era as we knew it, or is this the very beginning of a new era that we don't know? Perhaps it's a sense of both. I imagine that many of you have seen the movie City Slickers. I love that movie. It's just pure good entertainment. If you haven't seen it, make sure that you do. And here comes a small spoiler for a particular scene, but not the essence of the movie. These three best friends who go out ranching for 2 weeks, they're on their horses and they're driving cattle, and they're talking like friends do. And they asked each other in an adult version of Almost Truth or Dare, what was the best day of your life and what was the worst day of your life? The main character, played by Billy Crystal, explains the best day of when his dad took him to Yankee Stadium and Mickey Mantle hit a home run, and the worst day when they found a lump on his wife's breast. And they go through what were the greatest days and what happened, and then they get to one of their friends named Ed. Ed Ferrillo is played by Bruno Kirby. And he kept saying, I don't want to play the game, I don't want to play the game. And then finally, he says, okay, I'm 14 years old, and my mom and dad are fighting again. You know, because she caught him again. Caught him. This time the girl drove by the house to pick him up. And I finally realized he wasn't just cheating on my mother, he was cheating on all of us, he said. So I told him, you're bad to us. We don't love you. I'll take care of my mother and my sister. We don't need you anymore. And he made like he was going to hit me, but I didn't budge. And he turned around and he left. And he never came back. He never bothered us again. Well, I took care of my mother and my sister from that day on. That's my best day. And his best friend Phil says to him, well, what was your worst day? And Ed looks at him and says, the same day. When I think about whether this was the beginning of something or the end of something, I am reminded of a teaching in the Talmud from the end of the tractate of Makot. Now, the Talmud is an amalgam, a mixture of halachic teachings and contemplation and discussion, coupled with agadata, stories that give us some sense of what was happening and how it was applied. And this was a story about some of the greats of the Talmud, some of the all-stars of the rabbis that you remember from the Passover Seder, who were hanging out together on one particular day in Jerusalem. It was Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva. And they're in the outskirts of Jerusalem. The temple has just been destroyed. Those days, there was no text message and no CNN. They didn't know the temple was destroyed until they arrived at Mount Scopus. The same Mount Scopus that you know from Hebrew University, that you on your trips to Israel went to and saw the outlook of the city. And when these rabbis walked to Mount Scopus, still on that mountain, where you can see down to Jerusalem, they saw what was the ruins of the temple, the Holy of Holies, the place that was so sacred to the Jewish people. And they saw that it was in rubble and in ruins. And they did what we still do today when we know that destruction and death has occurred. They tore their clothes. They saw what had happened, and they tore their clothes. And then they made the short pilgrimage from the top of Mount Scopus down to the temple site. And they get down to the temple site, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, they start crying. And what made them cry is they saw a fox run out from what was the location of the Holy of Holies. To see a fox run out of a place that was the holiest place of the Jewish people. By the way, this location was where the Dome of the Rock is today. So when you go to Mount Scopus and you look down, the Dome of the Rock is clearly visible. You can see it from so many different mountaintops in Israel. This is where the temple was. So it was visible from everywhere, and now it was destroyed. And inside of it was the Holy of Holies, and now a fox ran out. And when the Talmud tells us that a fox ran out and it caused these three gentlemen to cry, it's tantamount to saying that it was infested with rodents and rats. As if, God forbid, this beautiful structure of this shul that we have were, God forbid, destroyed. And when we came to visit its destruction, we saw wildlife that's normally outside of its walls inside, rummaging through. It has lost its sense of sanctity. And when Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Yeshua, they started crying, Rabbi Akiva started to smile and to laugh. And they turned to Akiva, the outlier, and they say, "Why are you smiling? What are you laughing about?" And he turned to them and said, "What are you crying about?" He said, "Why are we crying? I'll tell you why we're crying. Because the holiest site of the Jewish people, the place where our sacrifices were offered and that we got closest to God, the place where the highest priest would go one day of year into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, has now just had the equivalent of rodents running through it. There is absolute destruction and rubble. That's why I'm crying. That's why we're all crying," they said to Akiva. "Now tell us why you're laughing." He said, "I'm laughing because I know that in the wake of destruction is when we have moments of unity and we get closer to redemption." And what he was saying is that from this moment, we will be stronger, we will be galvanized, we will rebuild the temple that will be even better than what we currently had and in this process. They, in essence, were asking a similar question to the question I asked on Wednesday. Are we watching the beginning of something or the end of something? Three of them saw the end of something, and one of them saw the beginning of something. That is about perspective. And when I have been thinking about this text over the past week, 3 days to be fair, and this unspeakable act of terrorism fomented by leaders in our communities, I have felt like Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua that I have wanted to cry and to weep. And I have felt galvanized and wanted to be strong in the response, like Rabbi Akiva. What I've realized is that asking the question, Are we at the beginning of something or are we at the end of something? It's a nice question to ask. Asking whether we should laugh like Elazar ben Azariah or Gamliel, or we should cry like Elazar ben Azariah and Gamliel, or we should laugh like Akiva. It's a nice question. But questions are for the classroom, and this is life. And our job is not to hope or to wish or to dream about a particular reality that we want. Our job is to work hard towards making that wish and dream and hope into a reality. I tell my children all the time, as you tell yours, you can be whatever you want to be. You will have our unconditional support, but it just won't happen. There are things you're going to have to do along the way to earn that. And if we want to see this as a moment of unity, if we want to see this as a moment that brings our community together, if we want to see it as I do, as a moment that says no to terrorism, no to hatred, no to intolerance, no to people who think that it's appropriate to chant those horrible things that they chanted, to defy the police, to hurt others, to pillage, and to destroy. And if we want to build something better and stronger and more tolerant and more understanding, we can't just hope for it. We have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. We have created a fantastic generation of armchair politicians. Thousands upon thousands, if not millions, that sit back and tell us all that we need to do. But when it comes to even calling, just making a phone call to their elected officials, they're too busy. If they can't even make a call to their elected officials, how do we expect the change that they desire to come to fruition? What Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva all had in common is that as leaders, they might have dreamt something, but they also worked hard to bring those dreams to fruition. And we can't just merely hope that a better day is on the horizon. We have to make that hope happen. God didn't build the temple, and God didn't destroy the temple. God gave humans life and then gave us the free will to make the choices that we do. And in those choices, there are people who built temples and people who destroyed it. And in those choices, there are those that walked into the Capitol to govern and those that walked in to destroy governance. That meant that they made choices and they rolled up their sleeves to shape the future that they wanted to see for themselves and for their children. And we have to do the very same. We can't only yell at CNN or Fox News and say, this is wrong or this is right or this is upsetting. Of course we can do that, but in addition to what? What part of our future are we going to be a part of? We can't come and see the rabbi and say, I'm upset that my child's marrying someone who's not Jewish, but not do any work to show and promote what Judaism is to you and your family, whether it's Shabbat dinners or trips to Israel or teaching Jewish values or lighting candles on Shabbat or Hanukkah. You have to work to get the result that you want. You can't merely wish it. You can't merely talk about it. You can't hope that you get skinny. You can't hope that you get smart. Everything takes work. And if we want to be the way I do, like Rabbi Akiva, and believe that this is the moment of something in our world that will be bigger, better, stronger, that we will learn from, then I am ready to roll up my sleeves and to create that as best as I can. And I stand here on this Shabbat with my hand stretched out to you, open and willing for your partnership in this same process. Like in that movie, I don't want to say this was our worst day. Today, as of now, it was Wednesday. Wednesday was my worst day as an American. Worse than 9/11 for me. Not in comparing the death toll or the tragedy or the shock or the loss. but in the erosion of what was tried to happen and by who? Or are we going to say, because of our collective work, this is our best day? It's up to us. Let's not be so passive, because we see that when we're passive, the temples are going to turn into ruins, and the citadels of our American government will be pillaged and destroyed. Let's get to work. As the rabbi said, the task is great, and the time is far too short. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're going to begin our service, page 184, continue our service. 184, please rise, Chatzi Kaddish.